Welcome to the Probate Nation. Whether you are caring for an elderly loved one as a court-appointed conservator or guardian, or as an agent named in an advanced medical directive or financial power of attorney, or just helping out without any of those authorities, your primary goal in each instance is to provide your loved one with the best care possible as they age. Often that care involves paying for caregivers in their home, or it may involve paying for that care in an assisted living facility or a nursing home. Getting good care for your loved one is important. Paying for it is often the challenge. If your loved one does not have long-term care insurance, and many folks do not, then you may have to seek assistance from the federal government program called Medicaid. There are many facets of Medicaid, and each state handles this federal program a bit differently. But I want to stress at the outset that qualifying for Medicaid is not something you should undertake as a do-it-yourself project. Our show tonight will focus on adult long-term care Medicaid in Maryland. And our guests are two Maryland attorneys who handle long-term care Medicaid planning and applications for Maryland adults. They will serve as our guide as we explore this long-term care financing option for all who may be traveling on the Maryland Living Probate train. Our first guest is a partner with the Annapolis law firm of Stavely and Salito Elder Law, LLC, where she focuses on Medicaid and asset protection, long-term care planning, powers of attorney, health care decisions, guardianship, and financial exploitation. She's a certified elder law attorney, as certified by the National Elder Law Foundation, and is the vice president of the Maryland, D.C. chapter of that association. She also serves on the Maryland State Advisory Commission on Quality of Care at End of Life and the Elder Law and Disability Rights Section Counsel for the Maryland State Bar Association. And she frequently testifies before the Maryland Legislature on Medicaid and elder law issues. Also with us today is the founder of the FAR Law Firm with offices in Virginia, D.C., and Maryland. He specializes in elder law, estate planning, and special needs planning, has authored numerous books and legal treatises in the field of elder law, and teaches classes for attorneys across the country on Medicaid asset protection strategies. He is listed in Super Lawyers and Best Lawyers in America, has earned the prestigious designation of Certified Elder Law Attorney from the NALA Foundation, and was voted by his peers to be a member of the Council of Advanced Practitioners of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. Please welcome attorneys Alina Salito and Evan Farr.
Thank you.
Holy moly, you guys are really qualified. Thanks so much for coming in and sharing your expertise with our viewers. That's very kind of you to do so.
Thanks
for having us.
Well, Evan, we've known each other for many years, and I'm so happy to have you on the show. Tell me a little bit about, just at the beginning, how do aging adults really pay for their long-term care needs these days?
Well, Richard, there are 3 or 4 major ways that people pay for long-term care. One is long-term care insurance, which is a very dwindling number of people. Only about 10% of the public have that. Specifically traditional long-term care insurance, where you pay monthly and you only get long-term care insurance benefit. That's a use it or lose it. More popular is the newer types of hybrid policies combining life insurance with a long-term care benefit, or an annuity with a long-term care benefit. So I'm seeing more and more people with those. Medicaid is, for most people, over 70% of people eventually wind up on Medicaid. I know what we're going to be focusing on today. There's also a veterans benefit for qualified wartime veterans called the Aid and Attendance benefit. It's a type of special pension. It's not a huge amount, but it's very worthwhile for wartime veterans. And in many cases, some of our clients will use a reverse mortgage as a way to pay for long-term care, particularly if it's in-home care, because they may have run out of all their other assets and they need to tap into their equity of their home in order to pay for in-home caregivers.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of options, but as you say, many people end up in the Medicaid area. Alina, what adult long-term care programs does Medicaid actually pay for?
It actually depends on where you live. It's a joint federal-state program, and the states really do have a lot of nuances as to exactly how they implement their part of the program. Maryland, unfortunately, is mostly in nursing homes. There is a benefit to get what's called waiver services in the community, but it's difficult to get and rare.
Okay. So Elena, let's continue with that discussion. So does Medicaid, though, pay for assisted living?
As a general rule, no.
Okay.
It can, in a very almost convoluted way. After you've had a stay in a nursing home for 30 days or more on Medicaid, you can kind of backdoor into assisted living or other community services. As a practical matter, once you've been in a nursing home, you deteriorate pretty quickly, and the chances of getting back home are pretty slim.
Okay. So that really is not really a really good option.
Yeah, no, it really isn't. For all practical purposes, the answer is no.
Okay. Evan, are there qualification criteria? So we're turning to Medicaid now, where, as you said, 70% of people end up having to need that. Is there a particular criteria that you have to meet in order to qualify for Medicare long-term care, Medicaid long-term care?
Yes, there are basically 4 criteria. You have to be medically needy, which means medically in need of the long-term or the nursing home level of care, which means you need to be in a nursing home. You're very sick, or you have severe cognitive impairment that renders you unable to meaningfully participate in your activities of daily living.
Okay.
There are also income requirements. Your income simply has to be lower than the cost of the nursing home care, which is pretty simple. We're not talking about a low-income program here. We're talking about long-term care Medicaid, which we also call middle-class Medicaid, because it's for middle-class people with very high incomes, because the cost of nursing homes in the Maryland, at least the DC suburban area of Maryland, is $12,000 to $14,000 a month, as it is throughout the DC metro region. So most people do not have anywhere near that kind of income. And of course, they look at assets. There is a minimum amount of assets that you can have in order to qualify for Medicaid, and that's where we elder law attorneys come in, is to help people reduce their countable assets to become qualified. And Medicaid also looks at gifts, or what are also called uncompensated transfers, during a 5-year look-back period. Okay.
So there's a bunch of little buckets we have to make sure we take care of in order to make sure we qualify. Let's continue. While Medicaid is a federal program, are there differences in those programs, or at least how they're handled when you go from state to state? Because I know our program's about Maryland, but I want folks to understand that if they're in Virginia, that there may be a different set of rules.
Yes, as Elena said, the rules are slightly different from state to state. I can speak to Virginia, DC, and Maryland, since I practice Medicaid and estate planning in all 3 of those areas. The rules are considerably more difficult in Maryland than in the other 2 jurisdictions. Elaine and I were just talking about the fact, that for instance, in Maryland, it's basically impossible to protect a home, whereas in Virginia and in DC, in DC, the home is an exempt asset completely. In Virginia, it's not exempt, but we have ways of protecting it in order to make it exempt that we just don't have in Maryland. So that's just a small sample, and there's dozens of other smaller nuances between the programs and how they vary. But yes,
They can be different.
There's probably about a 60% overlap, because it is based on federal law, but because the funding for Medicaid is essentially half from the federal government and half from the state, the federal government allows the states a lot of leeway in how the federal law is implemented in their state.
Okay. Now, I know there are different qualification rules between qualifying a single person versus a married couple. So I know we're going to get into that in more detail as we get a little further along in the program. And I know that I want to also mention to our viewers that Medicaid payments are not paid to the person who qualifies. It's paid directly to the nursing home. So they understand they're not going to be getting a check, whereas in some of the long-term care policies, that's what's happened. You actually get reimbursed and you get the check sent to you. So I wanted just to make sure I cover those points real quickly. Elena, Medicaid at home eligibility. Tell me a little bit, does Maryland actually offer that? I know we talked about that at the beginning, but I just want to reiterate to folks whether that really is an option anymore.
The state is working on it, I guess. What we have now, it's called the Waiver Program, and what that means is that the government waives the requirement that services be provided in a nursing home and allows you to take those services at home in either at your home or in some other community-based setting such as assisted living. There's a cap on that program. And Maryland currently has north of 21,000 people on the waiting list, and the waiting list is about 8.5 years long.
So that's not really an option.
It really isn't, and the state is trying to figure out a way to ameliorate it, and we're working with them to try and push them toward getting rid of the waiting list.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Well, let's talk about Medicaid in nursing home and the eligibility for that. So what does Medicaid cover for services that are delivered in a nursing home?
Well, Medicaid covers obviously your health care needs and any of the other related room and board with it. You also keep your insurance. It covers the donut hole. It also is starting to experiment with dental care a little bit. So this is a brand new experimental thing that's on the horizon. But it pretty much covers most of your basic needs and wants, and it lets you keep about $80 a month for your own personal needs.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
Double than what Virginia allows.
What are the basic eligibility requirements? I mean, we talked about, in order to be eligible for this program, what are the basic eligibility requirements? I haven't kind of talked about it at the beginning, but wanted to just kind of touch on those again.
Well, you have to be a citizen or a qualified alien.
Okay.
You have to be a Maryland resident, and that's not difficult in Maryland. All you have to do is come into the state and say, here I am, and you have become a Maryland resident for those purposes.
Okay.
As Evan said, you have to be medically eligible, so you have to need a nursing home level of care. And then you have an asset test, and your income has to be less than the cost of care, and your assets have to be, well, for a single person, $2,500 or less.
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. It's kind of sad to see all that money have to be dealt with in order to qualify. But well, let's talk about lastly, before I go to Evan, countable income for qualification. What is the Maryland qualification income for a single or a married person? I think it's the answer. I think is the same for both.
The income goes by the name on the check.
Okay.
So with a married couple, with a single person, if your name is on the check, it's your income.
Okay.
And the only criteria is that the income has to be less than the cost of care. And as Evan mentioned, with nursing home costs in excess of $12,000 a month, that's not that difficult.
So that's really not our problem.
It's
generally,
really, no,
to qualify.
not in Maryland.
Well, let's talk about what is the problem, Evan, and that's really the countable assets for qualification. So first off, are all assets counted in determining eligibility for Medicaid?
No, there
Okay.
are certain assets, right off the bat that are considered exempt assets, and then
What are
there
some
are-
of those assets? Just give me some examples.
well,
there.
some basic examples. For instance, some small examples would be a car. Actually, you can have more than one car in Maryland, unlike most other states,
really?
which only allow one car, as long as it's not a luxury car, something used for daily transportation. You can have more than one. You can have prepaid funeral arrangements if they're done in a proper manner. They need to be Medicaid acceptable, so basically meaning irrevocable, where you can't cash out the policy and get the money back.
Okay.
There are certain types of life insurance, like term life insurance, that has no cash value. Many other things like that where it has no cash value. If it can't be liquidated and turned into money, then it's typically an exempt asset.
Okay.
Personal belongings in the home, those are almost always exempt. And speaking of the home in Maryland is exempt, but it's not protected. And that's a very important distinction that most people don't understand when they And this is the same in many states. People read that the home is exempt, and they assume that means they're going to be able to keep the home and pass it on to their heirs upon death. Well, that's not the case in states like Maryland, where the home is exempt. It's only temporarily exempt. And in Maryland, if you have a home, if you're a single person and you don't have a spouse or a child living in the home, they're going to put a lien on the home. And when the home is sold after your death, they're going to get their cut of everything they paid for Medicaid. If you were in the nursing home for 2 years and Medicaid paid, say, $200,000 on your behalf, they're going to get their cut when the house gets sold via the lien on the house.
So the important distinction here is for folks to understand that while an asset may not be countable for qualification purposes, it still is eligible to repay the money that's been advanced by Medicaid in order to subsidize your nursing home care while you're living. And that's people need to understand that is
in many cases.
It's kind of a clawback some of the money they paid out as we get a little further down the road.
Right.
And we'll come back. I know in the second show we're going to do in our next episode is talking about some of the strategies where you might be able to take some steps to protect it even in those situations so it doesn't get clawed back. What is the amount of? Well, let me ask you: are retirement accounts countable or not countable in Maryland? In Maryland,
fully countable.
Fully
in
countable.
Maryland.
That's important for people to know.
Since you can withdraw them, you have full access. Maryland and most states say they're fully countable assets.
How about what is the amount of countable assets, just in dollar-wise, that a single person can have?
As Elena said, $2,500 for a single person.
And how about a married person? Let's switch gears on you here.
Well, with married couples, it's a little bit different, and this is basically the same in every state with some slight variation. But and this is without planning, with just under the basic laws. There's an amount that's now, I think, about $126,000. That's called the Community Spouse Resource Allowance, which is the maximum amount of assets that a healthy spouse, called the community spouse, is allowed to keep. That doesn't mean they get necessarily that much. What happens is when a married couple applies for Medicaid for one spouse, Medicaid takes what's called a snapshot of the total amount of assets that the married couple owned, regardless of whose name they were in. Could be in joint name or just in one of the spouses. They look at that snapshot amount, which is the amount as of the first day of the first month that somebody enters a nursing home for a period of longer than 30 days. And that amount is then divided in half. And half of that is the Community Spouse Resource Allowance that the healthy spouse gets to keep. But it's subject to that maximum of about $126,000, which goes up for inflation each year.
So that people understand that just because I have $300,000, I can't just take $250 or whatever it is, $200, and put it on the community spouse's side, and we have to take that snapshot and then divide.
Right.
So that's important to know. Let's talk a little bit about income. And the income that spouses can, is it still $2,500 if you're married?
Well, income, again, they only look at the income of the Medicaid applicant. So they don't look at the income of the spouse.
My mistake. Countable assets that the community spouse, that the spouse that's going to go in the nursing home can have. Is that $2,500?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the most that they can have.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about qualification pitfalls. So, Elena, tell me a little bit about some of the common pitfalls that applicants run into in meeting the income qualification requirements.
The income qualification
Yes, ma'am.
requirements. Well, in terms of income, there's really not.
No pitfalls there because
Yeah, Maryland is pretty upfront with it. As long as it's less than the cost of care, that's fine. Unlike other states that you have a cap on income, and then you need some kind of trust. But that's not anything that we get
how about
involved in.
the asset qualification side? What are the common
That's where it gets a little sticky, because there is a 5-year look back, and the state will go back 5 years and go through all your finances looking for transfers for less than fair market value for the purpose of qualifying for Medicaid. And up until fairly recently, the state had a presumption that any transfers made after the age of 65 were made for the purpose of qualifying for Medicaid, because when you turn 65, you should know that you're going to be in a nursing home or likely to be in a nursing home.
Ouch.
Yeah, and we all thought that was kind of not fair. And we spent a lot of time talking to the state, and we came to kind of an agreement that, yeah, that's not exactly correct. And the typical case would be the grandfather who pays for the wedding for the granddaughter has a heart attack at the reception or a stroke and ends up in the nursing home. Obviously, he did not pay for his granddaughter's wedding for the purpose of qualifying for Medicaid to go into a nursing home.
Good example.
So there are, a lot of exemptions now that are no longer considered that. But they're very situational, and there's not like one size fits all. But there are pitfalls to watch out for in that sense.
Okay, and there are, and I think the thing is we want to really alert folks that there are acceptable strategies in order to deal with the accountable asset issue.
Oh, yes.
That if we have time to plan for that, or even if you're in a crisis situation, there are things that can be done that are effective, time-tested, and will stand scrutiny in order to get you qualified.
Oh, absolutely. The federal government, when they made this scheme, really wanted to protect the community spouse. So even if you're doing crisis planning, you can protect everything for that person at home.
And that's great, and that's good to, good to know, and that's part of the reason why we wanted to have you folks come and talk to us about this. Just real briefly, I know we're going to get into this in another show. Are the strategies for a single person different than the strategies for a married person in order to deal with those countable assets?
Very, very different.
They are very
when you
different.
have a community spouse, it opens up a whole toolbox of planning strategies that you can use, whereas with a single person, you're pretty restricted.
Okay, but I think it's important people to understand that it's not that the same rules do not apply. That just because a married person can do certain things, it may not work for a single person.
Correct.
So people need to understand that. Well, I see the clock is. It continues to tick, so I wanted to go and ask you guys if you could each take a minute or so to give me some final thoughts about things you want to really emphasize from our conversation this evening. Elena, how about yourself?
All right, I'll start because it's an issue that's near and dear to my heart, and that's the Waiver Program. I really think that people ought to be able to age at home the way they want to. It protects their dignity, their privacy. It gives them their last months with family as opposed to an institution. And unfortunately, Maryland's scheme favors institutional care, and we're working very, very diligently to reverse that. But I think people should be aware, and for any Marylanders who are listening, I wish they would pick up the phone or send an email to their representatives and urge them to kind of take a look at the Waiver Program and see what they can do to change it.
Well, I really agree with you about being able to stay in the home. That's very, very important. I think it actually extends people's lives significantly.
Oh yeah, absolutely it does.
Evan, how about yourself? Some things you want to emphasize from our conversation this evening?
Sure. Well, just a quick follow-up on Elena's point and going to the differences between states. Both Virginia and DC have robust in-home Medicaid programs without waiting lists, without time delays. We can get people Medicaid home care in both Virginia and DC immediately, as long as they are medically in need of that nursing home level of care. The other thing I'd like to mention in closing is to make sure that your listeners understand that in this show we're just talking about the basic laws and, for instance, the asset thresholds, and that there are ways, which we're going to be talking about in another show, to protect the assets, which you've hinted at many times. But I think your listeners need to watch the other show. They can't just stop here and think, oh well, we have to spend down all of our assets until we have $2,500 and then and go broke, because that's in reality what most people think. Most people don't realize that there are certified elder law attorneys like the two of us here today who do this type of work and help people protect assets every day in order to qualify for Medicaid, so they don't have to go broke.
Well, I think that's so true. Alina and Evan, I want to thank you both so much for coming in and starting this conversation about how we can get adult long-term care Medicaid for our Maryland residents. So thank you very much for that great community service.
Thank you for having us. This was a good show. Thank you.
You're very welcome. You know, without a doubt, handling the finances for an aging adult can be challenging, and nothing can be more stressful than trying to figure out how to pay for their care, especially when your loved one has no long-term care insurance or has financial resources they want to preserve for their spouse or their children. Maryland Adult Long-Term Care Medicaid is a resource that may solve this need, but as we learned this evening, there are income and asset qualification rules to navigate and common pitfalls to avoid. In our next show, part 2 on this topic introduction, we will review some of the common misunderstandings about adult long-term care Medicaid, asset transfer restrictions, planning strategies used to qualify for Medicaid, and the application process itself. I encourage you to join us for that program. Finally, I want to add these words of caution. Whether you are trying to qualify your elderly loved one for Medicaid coverage before a crisis or even during a crisis, be forewarned that Medicaid planning is not something that lends itself to do-it-yourself efforts. See an attorney for guidance and advice on your options. This brings us to the conclusion of our show tonight. We hope you found it helpful. Replays of this show and all the shows broadcast to date, along with other helpful information, can be viewed on the Probate Nation website. On behalf of the Probate Nation, thank you for visiting with us.